Ann, you ready?
I'm ready to go.
All right, beautiful. Ty, you ready?
Let's go.
All right. Timeout. Tyler, who are we taking a timeout with today?
Well, thank you, Kevin. And it's a nice Monday afternoon when you have the president of Coordinated Care Services, Ann Wilder, in the house. And thanks for being a part of this Timeout with Leaders with us this afternoon. And Ann, your accolades go on and on. Your friend Barbara and Heidi try to give us a little inside scoop on you. And I don't even know where to start besides, what'd you eat for breakfast this morning, Ann?
Oh my God. That is not the question I was asking. I was thinking I would get, but you know what? I ate what I eat almost every morning, and it's not too exciting, but it's a little bit of fruit, a little bit of yogurt, a little bit of granola, and 3 cups of coffee. So
and 3 cups of coffee. Yeah. I'm trailing shortly behind with 2, but otherwise I can't wake up.
I'm an early riser, so I space them out, but I usually get my 3 cups in.
All right.
Tyler and I love asking people. So you're taking Tyler and I out to dinner with Barbara. We're going out to have a good time. What spot are you picking here in Rochester?
Man, I love to eat, so there could be a lot of them, but I would probably go to Rocco. And that means I get to have the charred bread and the ricotta, which is one of my very favorite things to eat. So everything there is delicious, but that's where I would want to go.
That's one of my favorite spots. Tyler, have you been?
I don't think I have. No, but sign me up.
Yeah, it's a good little Italian restaurant, you know?
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, Ann, is there one human being in this world that you would be nervous to meet? And who would that be?
Gosh, there's plenty of people I think I would be, nervous to meet, but, probably, President Biden, but.
A lot of, and the other thing that we always like to know, Ann, too, is music, right? I think a lot of music sometimes brings people together. You get to learn a lot about people by what kind of music that they listen to. Now, let's say we're at the company holiday party this year coming up, and we have karaoke night going on, and Ann Wilder stepping up to the mic for the first song. What song are you karaokeing?
Oh man, well you can be sure you would not find me at karaoke, but if I was gonna put on, a song that would put me in a good mood, I can answer that question. That would probably be, I would do September, Earth, Wind and Fire. That's the song I play when I need to walk in the door with a smile on my face. So you will probably not want me to do karaoke to it, but I will play it loud in my car. And that's where I do my singing. So I'm just saying, in my car, I think I'm an excellent singer. So if you pull up next to me, I also think I'm invisible when I'm in the car. So just let me have my little moment. And
Will do.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. Yeah, I'll be looking out for that now. Earth, Wind and Fire is up there for me. That's
some good mood. That's a good mood music. And I'm a girl of the 70s and 80s. So I go back to that time too.
Time and time again, out of everybody that we had a conversation with before the show, and just kind of, hey, we're interviewing Ann. Everybody absolutely, first thing they said, we love Ann, right? And then they always said, you're not going to find a more people-centered, focused leader out there. Do you want to go kind of discuss how you found people to be the greatest asset of organizations and why you think so passionately about their development in order to see that greater return as a business?
Yeah, that's really good feedback to have. And I feel like that's always been so important. But I'll tell you, we were doing some strategic planning as an organization in about, I think it was 2015. And up until that point, some of our planning was more focused on the work that we're going to do and the customers we wanted to serve, and just more traditional planning around that. And I think during that process, though, it just became crystal clear that, our greatest asset is our people, the talented people who are in our workforce, who are really, kind of bringing their commitment to our mission, their specific talents, and that our ultimate success is really driven by being the organization that really provides people just an excellent place to either start out or grow their career. And it just really reoriented our thinking around if we do that right, then the rest of it's going to follow. And, I think that was always in kind of like a little bit in the DNA of this organization. But I just remember during that one process that we actually changed our vision statement at that point to really reflect it, that it really wasn't about, where we were going or what we did, but really the type of environment we were really going to work hard to create for the people who work here.
Wow. And a lot of people would just assume like culture, right? Culture is one of those things that's so interesting to me because I think a lot of people, when we make a list, we always like to check things off, but culture is never done, right? It's never final.
Right.
You've never achieved culture. What are some of your fundamental pillars to culture that you've seen and also through your own evolution, like you said, through the 70s and 80s and where we are today, very different from what work life was back in the 80s and the 90s?
You're so right. I mean, I think like keeping pace with what the current work reality is so important. I feel like, and honestly, like, I mean, I've been at CCSI for more than 20 years. And I think the reason I came to CCSI and then knew pretty immediately I had found my place was the culture that was there when I got here. And it was just a culture of, really collaboration and really strong commitment to the work that, the work of the organization. And I immediately felt at home here. And I knew it was really special. Like, I don't know if this is relatable to you, but, I think about in past jobs, like that Sunday night stomach ache, right?
Yeah.
Like
Sunday night scaries. Yeah.
Like I'm just, I'm just like not feeling that, I want to go where I'm going in the morning. And man, we spend so much time at work. And, I think some of that comes from really not being in an environment that kind of sees you as a person where you feel like, sort of your work is making a contribution and that you're really kind of part of it. And I feel like that was the culture of CCSI when I started in 2000. And I think it's really been important for me. And I think the rest of my leadership team to think about how do we hold that culture? How do we hold that culture when we grow from being 20 people to 50 people to 100 to 450 today, and that takes I think that takes a lot of intentionality in kind of the sort of like the human infrastructure of your work, right? Does that kind of get to what you were trying to?
Exactly what it was, because it's that constant evolution almost. You're never there, you never finish, and you never made it. So I love focusing on the human infrastructure first and focus really. And Tyler, what it brings me back to is when Peter Wallen told us the story about the cupcake lady. So when Anne was just mentioning about that growth, sometimes when you grow, it starts to dilute. Rather than if you're focusing on the right principles and right values to continue to propel your growth forward. Ty, what were you thinking about?
And I was going to ask you, when you walked through the doors back, on your first day of work at CCSI, who set the tone to make that people first? Or just when you said you walked in and you felt something special, whoever there set the tone for that? Who'd you learn from?
Yeah, well, I think part of it came from Glenn Gravino, who was really the president of CCSI at the time. And, in all fairness, they had been a customer of mine. So I had worked for them as a customer for the maybe 3 or 4 years prior. So I kind of had that experience and kind of appreciated really what he brought to that role. But I know, really early, I'm talking like my first week at CCSI, being given a pretty big project. And, as I started to dig into it, really feeling like, man, this is a big project. And I've been here for 3 days. And even though I've known this organization from afar, there are some things that I don't know how to do. And before I even needed to ask, somebody came into my office and said, hey, I hear you're working on this. Do you need any help? And that was like so different than, somebody saying like, hey, this isn't even my job. And you've only been here like a week. And I'm going to, come across the hall and extend my hand. And he was just incredibly helpful and ended up, sort of being a project that, ended up being a multi-year project that, we had a chance to work on. But just that feeling of somebody coming in and saying, without asking, do you need help? Because that probably wouldn't have been my go-to at that point, right? Because I'm in a new job and I'm nervous and I'm wanting to, I think the Anne of today, I hope would be quicker to ask for help, but I don't think that wouldn't have been me in that moment.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of cemented it. I was just like, you know what, I'm in the right place.
That's
I'd say
cool.
so. Day 3. My
Yeah.
God.
Well, I may be, I might be exaggerating, but it was very early on, and it was just that it was that experience and that ability to sort of be collaborative, even if it wasn't a project you were involved with, but if you had, a perspective and just that openness for doing kind of that collegial collaboration really felt special to me.
Awesome.
So cool. Especially when that feels like a team, right? Where you feel like somebody actually has your back and is looking out for you, and you
100%.
trust they're going to be there. What was your first job?
Paid job as like a.
What was your first? Yeah, well, I always am curious. Was it a service-related industry where you're a waitress or a movie? What was your first job ever?
Well, my first job, I'm the oldest of 4 and I lived in a neighborhood with a lot of little kids. So my official first job is I had a ton of babies, but a job that actually earned me a paycheck. My first job, like a lot of people in this town, was at Wegmans.
Oh my
so that was, my first job because I could walk there from my house, but that was Wegmans of another era, no scanners, like looking for price tags, like dealing with coupons. It was a different kind of, different kind of environment, but it was a good job. It was a good place to start.
And do you think that's where potentially the seed was planted for you to focus on like that employee experience, because it carries over into your customers' experience and why the employees are so important or the people are so important?
I don't know if it came directly from that experience. I feel like I got a little piece of that almost with every job along the way. And I think sometimes even having an experience where that wasn't the case also sort of underscores the importance of kind of having that experience. But, I took kind of a winding path to where I am. And, so I know sometimes that makes people, at least parents nervous, like, oh, how many things are you going to try? But I also feel like, sometimes that's the ruling out part, right? You have to figure out sometimes you have to figure out what you don't like to, sort of get a little closer to what excites you and what gets you motivated.
Oh, for sure. And I see that. That's amazing. And I wanted to ask, because sometimes you hear about Wegmans, you hear about how great their culture is, right? That they're a HR company that happens to sell groceries, is what Danny was famed for saying. And sometimes, I grew up in a service-based industry, so I think that's why I see the customer and employee experience so differently myself. But it is almost like crooked mile journey too, which is what life is all about, I guess, at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think you learn something sort of at every bend, and you might not realize it at the time, but I do think that's good advice to just, especially when I think about our younger people and the fact that, sometimes you think they're supposed to be this path from I'm going to go to high school, then I'm going to go to college, and I'm going to know exactly what I want to be. And then, I think sometimes that happens for people, and I think that's great. And if you were to ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would tell you, like, I had no idea. I had no idea. Everything seemed so, I didn't know because I hadn't really seen it in action. And so, I think it's okay not to know too. I feel like that's maybe an important message.
Yeah.
Right. Did you ever dream, Ann, of being a president of a 450 person organization?
No, not in a million years. And honestly, it wasn't, I think that I never would have thought about that. I've always, thought about being, kind of like a good supporting player, right? And, that it wasn't really until somebody said, hey, like, I see you in this role. And, for me to really think like, could I see myself in that role? And would I want that role? And, I think that's, sometimes I think it requires somebody to kind of see it in you before you can, maybe see it in yourself. So, I'm glad somebody had that, had that idea about me and could, spur my thinking in that, because I don't know that it would come on my own.
Do you remember the time and place and where you were when someone saw that in you?
I do. I remember it was actually the former president of CCSI when I was talking with him about, sort of what I wanted to do next. And I think that's kind of where he sort of laid out where he thought that, that might go. And, at the time I wasn't, I didn't think about it as an actual thing that would happen, but it did start to, sort of prompt my thinking around that. So
No.
he was a good mentor. Really, I learned a lot. I learned a ton just by watching him. And I think sometimes that's a really good way to learn too, just seeing how people, handle certain situations and, how they are in the world.
Couldn't agree more.
Awesome.
And you almost stepped like right into it, right? I mean, this was a real, I mean, it seemed like as you came into this role, you were just learning just as much, but you knew like several of what you learned and watched and witnessed of what what leadership was supposed to look like. Because you got a degree in marketing,
Yeah.
correct? And then policy. So
Yeah.
what did you initially want to do?
Right. Well, as I said, it took me a while to sort of figure that out. And, I went to 3 different undergraduate universities. I ended up at RIT. And by that time, I was, sort of focused on business. And it was more the marketing research part that I thought was interesting. I really liked the idea of like what makes, what kind of governs people's behavior, what guides decision making. How do you use data to kind of help predict that? So it was really the research end. And the policy, honestly, was just sort of being in the right place at the right time. I had graduated, I was interviewing. I knew I needed to develop some more quantitative skills based on the positions I was interviewing, but I also knew at that point that I wanted to be in the public sector. By that point, I knew I really wanted to not necessarily, sort of be, sort of producing widgets, but working for an organization from a business perspective that was really contributing to the public good. And I had just an informational interview with who was the chair of the policy program at U of R. And literally this was in the summer. And it sounded really interesting. And he had a student who had backed out. So they had an open position. So he literally said, if you take your GREs this weekend and submit an application, maybe you can have the spot. So I took my GRE standby with hardly any studying, and really a couple weeks later, I was enrolled in public policy analysis at the University of Rochester. So, and it sounds like a little happened. I mean, it was like a little, just I think a lucky series of conversations. But really, at that point, that's where things started to come together. Like, how do you use data? How do you use, sort of really kind of data and evaluation to help form a decision to really use resources to solve complicated problems that impact human beings. So, that's where I started to think about, okay, this is the kind of work I want to do.
Yeah. And that's probably why you continue. I know you love to use numbers and data to support decision making today, right? And
yeah, that was the job I was brought to CCSI for. I came in as their director of data analysis and project management. So it was all really about, but not data for data's sake, but really data for saying, okay, like what's going on, whether it's in a program, whether it's in a system, are we achieving what we, hope to achieve? And if not, like what can we do? And I did, before I came to CCSI, I worked for a survey research group and ended up being on a project to evaluate 6 programs in the state of Ohio, where they were evaluating what were, I think at the time, some really innovative approaches to substance use disorder services and preventive services. And so we were so excited to evaluate the impact. And I was working with a colleague, and we got in our car and we actually drove to Ohio because we were going to visit each site. And we had this complicated structure that we were going to really assess their impact. And a lot of the organizations really hadn't collected any data. So they were funded and they were doing great work. But when we said, okay, well, like, let's look at some of your baseline data. And, it was just, none of that had really been, sort of baked into the structure. So it was just like a heartbreak, because you have programs that are really excited about what they're doing, some really good work, but not really kind of the evidence to really sort of to illustrate it. So, just being part of making sure that, organizations that are doing outstanding work have the ability to, gather and look at the information to show how they're doing, where they're having success. If they're not yet having success, what might they need to, do differently? So, that part of the work, even though CCSI does a lot of other things, that part of it has always been, particularly interesting to me.
That is awesome. It's really awesome that you found your purpose and you loved it. Whatever sparked that curiosity, and I'm glad you ran with it, because it seemed to catch on like wildfire for you.
Yeah.
Can you kind of dive into CCSI a little bit for us? Just kind of tell us what your mission statement is and what y'all are about over there.
Our mission hasn't evolved too much, sort of over the years. And I always use like a little bit of shortcut to our mission statement because I think I'd like to say it in fewer words. But, at the end, at the heart of it, we help organizations that help people. Mm-hmm. And that's really what CCSI does. And we do that by partnering with organizations to provide them with sort of the essential business supports and the specialized staffing they need to deliver really impactful programs and services that help people and build stronger communities. So we're really a not-for-profit that helps other not-for-profits and local government. So that's kind of, and we do that by, sort of covering a lot of ground. And I could talk a little bit more about that if you want. Is that helpful?
Please.
Yeah.
All right. So if I were going to think about our general, sort of mission of helping organizations to help others, we do that in 3 big areas of work. And our biggest area today is something that we call program management. And that's when we'll partner with a customer. Oftentimes it might be a local government or a provider, and they really want to deliver, they've got a program or service that they want to deliver. And so maybe they've got the model identified, they know what they want to accomplish, and we'll really team with them to hire the workforce specifically to, kind of bring that program to life or to operate that program. So it'll be really that specialized staffing. So there's a big HR component to it. And then any infrastructure that team needs. Maybe they need office space, maybe they need a data collection system, but it really sort of, really kind of brings the people to to the idea for the program that really allows somebody to kind of, sort of bring a new service or a program to life.
Oh yeah.
And so
without all the other, without an enormous amount of financing.
Right. And it also just, it's really thinking about, okay, what is the purpose? What's the skill set of the workforce? Sort of what do we really need in order to recruit that, to really build the best team for delivering this program or service. So that's probably, 75 to 80% of our workforce and our revenue is really those teams that are, sort of delivering programs and services on behalf of our customers. So that's one piece of it. Then sort of on the other side, we've got a team that does more traditional consulting, or sometimes in our industry, we call it technical assistance. And that's really maybe the, time limited, assistance to help organizations just, either, solve problems or deliver services better. That might be specialized training in the area of trauma responsiveness or diversity, equity, and inclusion. It might be teaming with an organization to really help them collect and analyze the data they need to assess assess their performance in a really sort of in a meaningful way. So we've got, a team that's really doing that type of consulting work. And we work with schools and school districts. We work with local government. Sometimes we'll be able to kind of take a skill set that's over here on the consulting side and push it into a program that we're operating, because there's just that, there's that need to, sort of build that specialized skill set. And then our third area of work is we call that business management or capacity building. That's where we might work with a smaller organization that just needs a little bit of additional like infrastructure or specialized expertise to run their agency really well. So maybe that's a little bit of, chief fiscal officer, a little bit of financial support, or some specialized HR support, or some help in the area of compliance. And, the idea is to just, kind of wrap around what's already in place in that organization and just push in that little bit of extra that helps them, whether it's helping them grow to the next level, get over maybe a complicated issue, and just allow them to, do their very best work. At the end of the day, again, what we want to be doing is strengthening the organizations that are delivering those really important services to individuals in the community that kind of need those services.
I love it. And probably some of these organizations that maybe, again, would have taken more financially that was available from a grant or what have you, is now you're giving them the avenue to so provide the community those services at a fraction of the expense, which is
Well,
fascinating.
and I think that's really the challenge, is to see, like, we're a not-for-profit that serves other not-for-profits in a time where, budgets are tight and really every dollar counts. So I think the challenge and, on our end is, how do we balance really, offering services that we think are just, really high quality, at a cost that is affordable. And, part of that is, really figuring out how to partner with our customers in a way that really leverages everything they have too. I mean, a lot of our customer relationships are, more than 20 years. So, during that time, we'll really get a good appreciation for, sort of what they're working on, the talents they have within their team, their own infrastructure. And I think what we really want to do is just, sort of partner together in a way that, doesn't replace what they already have, but just, sort of augment, so that you've got that synergy. And that's, I think, the fun part of the work too, is when you have those long-term relationships with customers, you really get to, it's that, the opportunity to kind of, do work that, unfolds over multiple years. And I think the synergy, and also just the good, sort of working relationships too. I think it's almost, sort of feels like sort of an extension of our family here.
That's so nice. Well, and you do get so in tune or ingrained with that organization, which is awesome to even have the ability to develop that type of relationship, because you don't have that relationship without trust. And we know that trust is so important in today's environment. And trust has been kind of at the forefront of leadership. And we're seeing more leadership coaches than ever before to tell you guys on how to lead, right? When you stepped into that leadership role, what were some of the first things that you did? We're talking about the Great Resignation. There's a lot of turnover right now, but maybe for that new manager, that new person that's starting that new position, whether they're by leader, by title or not, what are things that they should be doing within those first couple of days or weeks of starting that new position?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had a little bit of an advantage because I stepped into a position with colleagues that I had been working, with. So kind of had the benefit of a little bit of that relationship and that support, which was really important. I think part of it, I think, is just to don't be afraid to take the time to get the lay of the land, right? Like, you're coming into a team where there is expertise, where, sort of things are working, and really understanding, okay, what's currently happening and how well, how's it working and why is it structured this way, so that, as you're, thinking about sort of, working together to build toward what's next, you're kind of working from a place of, kind of having sort of having that understanding of what's currently happening. And I think that, like, really values what's been brought to the table, right? And then, really if you're in a position where you're now, kind of starting to lay out a vision to take a next step, really, sort of getting everybody, sort of like in line with that vision, and, having the opportunity to hear, the range of perspectives that you need to take in when you're forming that vision, because, you only know what you know. And, I think harnessing, the perspectives, the history, the talent that is kind of around the table, I think is an important part, and not being afraid to know that might take a little time to gel.
Yeah, that is awesome, Ann. Well, I was going to ask you, how do you make sure that your employees over there know that they're valued? What kind of practices and best practices have you learned over the years, just to simply make sure that your folks over there know that they're valued?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I mean, I think part of it is just like the investment in, sort of in some of the, like, some of the things that we know create, sort of a positive culture. Like, we do an annual feedback survey, and that's not so special. All organizations I know do that. We really take the time to read, sort of look at those survey results, but also read the verbatim comments, right? So if somebody's going to take the time to say, like, when we do that survey to, to tell you a little bit more about my experience, we really, sift through that as a leadership team and think about, okay, what is it that we need to do now in response to sort of what our staff are telling us? And, that can be, things that are bigger, and sometimes that's, things that are smaller. But, I think people feel valued when they feel seen, when really structure, in as much as you can, sort of how the organization is working in a way that really supports the things that are most important to them. Like you hit the nail on the head. There's been a lot of changes. I mean, both with COVID and even before, just figuring out, how do you create a work environment that affords, sort of the right, the right flexibility, right? Knowing, people are juggling really important responsibilities in work and outside of work. And, how do we sort of remove stressors? How do we remove barriers? What can we do as an employer to help, sort of employees, have an easier job doing, doing their work. And sometimes that can be just small things. Like a few years ago, and this is a service that Barbara DeRozier, our CHRO, helped us put in place. But we've got Easy Access MD. So that means if it's a service that will bring at no charge to me as an employee, urgent care to my home. So if I've got something after hours and I need to sort of get a test or, sort of get a consult, Easy Access MP is a service that really helps employees get the help they need for, them or their families to stay healthy, but to maybe just reduce the stressor, right? So maybe I'm not putting 3 kids in the car and like trying to drive to urgent care at 9 o'clock at night because I think somebody has an ear infection. So even thinking about, sort of what can we do to, sort of help remove some of the stressors that, make it hard to be, sort of a working person today, in all, in all different ways.
And I love that. I mean, and just being in tune with that, I think is I mean, a part of the battle that I think a lot of leaders don't even get to, right? And it sounds like we see the leadership are almost disconnected from the frontline workers because they almost take themselves out of that reality, that difficult hardship that they might be going, or that they might have to get 2 kids off the bus. What types of things do you do to ensure that you're not falling out of tune with some of the other people, like the frontline workers that are at coordinated care, or just to understand where they are within their day or their life?
Right. I mean, I think part of it is just open channels of communication, right? And, it's different today, right? If you were to look at where my office is, at our J Street location, it's kind of in the middle of everything. And that's because I kind of want to hear what's going on, right? And so part of it is not, because then you take a pulse, right? When you walk into the lunchroom, when you see, sort of people and, sort of you kind of have a sense in that way. Again, I think, having feedback surveys when we're really asking people, sort of what's, sort of what do they want? What will make things better for them, and being able to kind of, have a conduit for that. And then I think that's got to trickle down, right? We need to have, supervisors need to be having those conversations with their team. And if they hear, something consistent, wow, people are struggling with this, or this would be really helpful, having sort of a conduit for bringing that information back.
One of the things that you said earlier, and I wanted to ask you on it, is that you learned almost like what not to do, right? When you come from an environment where you're not valued, you're not heard, you're not encouraged to learn, you almost learn what not to do, and you want to do the complete opposite. What did you learn in prior experiences that you knew that this was absolutely most important, that you had to understand your people on a greater level in order to relate and really listen? I think is what I'm hearing is how you drive your policies and procedures and ideas, is really just listening to what the employees are telling you or your people are
right. And I think maybe setting the expectation that you should have a voice in sort of what works best for you. And part of that was maybe, sort of like I think about some of my earlier jobs, not being sure I had that voice, right? And whether that voice was, whether that voice wasn't encouraged, or whether I didn't yet know how to use my voice. I mean, I think there's, I think as we go through our career, I think we, sometimes we have an easier time, sort of figuring out, sort of where we can have an impact. And so I think part of that was developmental, but I do think that's important. I'm also, I'm divorced. I have 3 children. I spent a good part of my career being kind of the, sort of my kids live with me, almost full time. So I had a lot, I mean, logistics were pretty much on me.
Yeah.
And so, I know what it's like to have 3 kids at 2 different daycares and still have to be at work. And, I know what it's like when you're leaving work and trying to figure out, okay, what needs to happen first, second, third, 56, like before we all get to where we need to go. And so, that part of, I remember what that feels like and how sometimes just a little bit of flexibility can make all the difference. And so, I think that's kind of, I mean, I know I bring that mindset, but I'm not alone. I think that's really shared within our team here is, when a little flexibility, when a little empathy, when a little bit of, seeing, what might make things a little easier when we can offer that, I think we want to do that.
Which I love, because we always say it starts from the top down. And
Yeah.
I think when that's like like that's just so cool to hear. And no wonder you guys are growing so rapidly over there. And it's when you have a leadership like yourself, and yeah, I mean, your ego is not large, like, and sometimes I think egos get in the way, but the way that you're able to check your ego and really just say I'm successful because these other people help me to become successful is just astonishing. And it's probably no wonder why you won the 2020 Woman of the Year award there. So I wanted to be sure that I asked you this question is, what are you telling the women of today, right? I think society puts a lot of pressures on women, I think, and men
Right.
of all races too. And I think, what are you telling women today if they want to see themselves in leadership, whether by title or not title? What are you telling them? What should they be doing today in their lives, or things that they should be thinking about? How are you preparing females to more females to step into the leadership roles?
That's a great question. And I know in particular, the last year or two has been really hard for, it's been hard for the workforce in general, but I think we know we've lost, sort of females from the workforce given, sort of other demands. And I think part of it is just, kind of, seeing where you want to be, I think is important to, to not be afraid to sort of think about, where do you want to be? And then I think it's also, sort of important to, sort of really begin to, sort of draw the boundaries around, that goal. Like, here's where I want to go, but here's how I want to get there. And, I think there's increasing support and an expectation that you can kind of create some boundaries in terms of, sort of, the way you do your work, and maybe things that you're not willing to do. And, so I think sometimes really being clear about that, and, sort of that I don't think I felt exactly that way coming, sort of in the earlier parts of my career, but, I can, see that today. It's like, we're in it for the long haul, right? It's a marathon. So, really figuring out, sort of how do you strike that balance between work that you're really passionate about, that you really feel is, a good reason to get up and go to work every day. And, what else in your life do you need to attend to as well? And, sort of creating that balance. Like, I feel like I'm really fortunate here. I'm excited to come to work every day. Like, I wake up thinking about it. And, even if it's a complicated day, or, I think just, sort of, I think doing work that I think is important with people who are really committed and, really willing to kind of push the envelope in terms of problem solving. There's really no place I'd rather be almost any day.
Tyler, sounds like she's feeding off that energy. I don't know about you, but that energy sounds pretty darn electric over there, because it sounds like it's fueling everybody to go above and beyond and look at challenges in a different lens or a different angle to solve and help problem solve. It's pretty remarkable stuff, Anne, that you've been able to do and accomplish over there. Tyler, what else?
I just want to say, I think that really comes, in some sense, like, really from the teams. I think we do and part of that is maybe the people who, come to CCSI, the people we are able to bring. That creativity and that sort of, I think that real push to solve, important problems that impact human beings. That's not coming solely from me. I think we've got that level of just, commitment and creativity and innovation from our teams. And I think that's also energizing, right? When you see a team really break through and do something spectacular or solve a complicated problem. I mean, to me, that makes me excited. That makes me feel like, oh, I've got a little more gas in my tank now too.
Yeah. Wow.
And then all it takes is a little acknowledgement from the top sometimes,
Yeah.
you know, when you see that start clicking, and then in harmony, you know, when that
Right.
word harmony starts to come around your life, or at least in my life, I get all fired up in a much settled way nowadays, but I get fired up, and I was just scrolling through all your accolades here and all your volunteer work. And I was going to ask you, you know, I see that y'all have an award-winning health and wellness program over there. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you just dive into a little bit about what that's about over there? I was pretty interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, oh my gosh, I should be able to like rattle it off, but we've got, our wellness program really was developed with a lot of input from our staff, and really thinking about, when we think about wellness, it's not, it certainly is your physical health, but it's your emotional health, it's your mental health, it's your financial health. It's really kind of thinking about, sort of the whole person. So over the last several years, we really, continued to kind of add to what we define as wellness, to really, really connect to the things that our staff have said is important. So, whether that's, how do we set the physical location, what are the attributes of our physical workspace that are going to make people feel comfortable? Sort of the easy access MD was, an idea coming out of that to say, man, sometimes it's really hard to get some of those, health concerns met, when when you're busy or when you're stretched. So, really thinking about, sort of wellness as really all of you, I think is kind of the distinguisher in that one. And there's just been a lot of creative ideas too from the team that really gave rise to that program.
That's awesome, man. I saw you were on a pretty cool task force. It was the Monroe Mental Health and Substance Abuse Disorder Task Force. And what'd you learn from that?
Well, that was really important. That was work that CCSI supported the Monroe County Office of Mental Health in doing, and it was really to take a step back, really on the heels of sort of Daniel Prude, COVID-19, all of the challenges in the behavioral health system, and really take a look at sort of really what needs what needs to work better. So it really involved about 60 sort of individuals who really came together from all parts of the community. Sort of we had law enforcement and mental health providers and advocacy groups, and really taking a step back and looking at not like a 5-year plan, but really saying, okay, let's use this 90 days and take a step back and think about what needs to work, sort of what needs to work better. And so out of that came a number of initiatives that the sort of the director of the Monroe County Office of Mental Health now is really advancing. So I mean, I think it was a great, it was a really good example of how do you bring together sort of the brain power of the community and sort of really sort of work to sort of put forward some ideas to sort of make progress in some really important areas.
Awesome. Why do it alone?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you said though is back to I'm going to touch on that creativity and innovation piece. When you were talking about creating those environments, and I'm going back to the culture question because again, you have to create that safe space, just like you were talking about with this task force. You're creating a safe space for people to feel comfortable and confident that they can come and say, hey, I'm not doing too well emotionally right now, or I'm having a really tough time financially. You have to create that environment where people are willing, I guess, to show their ugly side, or maybe the side that they don't want to show at work. How do you create that safe space? And it might be on a one-on-one relationship or in a conversation, but how do you, I guess, make your team and your managers and staff feel safe in the walls of CCSI?
Right. Oh, that's such an important question. And especially now, right? Just realizing that, sometimes you're, dealing with a struggle, and, if you can, if you can feel the trust, if you can feel that, trust in being vulnerable with whether it's your supervisor, whether it's maybe somebody from, your HR department to say, hey, here's what's going on with me, and not feel like, you're going to be penalized, right? And it particularly, I think that's particularly important in the area of the kind of mental health and addiction, right? Where, I think, despite so many efforts to kind of reduce the stigma, I think that sometimes still prevents people from, sort of reaching out or, sort of really getting the help that they need. So, I think, sort of making that just, sort of building that trust at all levels. But I think it is really important, that relationship between, kind of a staff member and their supervisor. To just, and some of that is also, it is trust, but sometimes it's just time, right? Taking the time to just maybe, if somebody doesn't, if somebody just doesn't look like they're having a great day, you can just take in a minute to say, hey, everything okay? Sometimes that's the door opener. And then your kind of your benefits have to back it up. Like, we worked to increase the number of mental health visits we have, as part of our EAP program. We knew how important that was. But I think that trust in, sort of being able to sort of be seen as, a human being in the workplace is really important. I think we're in a time where, sort of like, whether it's, mental health, addiction, financial challenges, like there's not one of us that hasn't touched in some kind of way, right? And so I think appreciating that, that is just, that's part of, who we are. And, if we, create the environment where those conversations can be had, then, I think we build that trust, and hopefully we provide the supports that, maybe make a difference for someone.
Yeah. The fact, I mean, just surveys in general is something that I get to talk to in my day job, and say, if you're surveying and you're not doing anything with that information, stop doing it, because it's almost more detrimental than even doing the survey in the first place. One of the things that Tyler and I always like to talk about too is you mentioned your purpose. You mentioned finding and unlocking your purpose. It seemed like every day was a challenge. You loved serving others and helping others to enable their success and watch them succeed. But what would you like Ann Wilder's legacy to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I love being part of I've loved being part of helping to sort of build CCSI. So, I think, to me, that is the, sort of being able to, sort of, whether it's a team, whether it's an organization, just really creating the opportunity for somebody to have been part of something that they felt was special and important and gratifying, and maybe they saw themselves a little bit differently. So I don't know if that gets what you're, after what you're looking for, but I guess that's the way,
Of course. What Tyler and I were hoping for is that you didn't say, yeah, I hope to see my name on some big building out there. No, I'm just kidding. You want to be remembered for all the great work that you did. And I think that I pretty much exactly how I thought you were going to answer that question is,
and maybe some of the structures that sustain it, right? Because, you might move on, but if you put in place, a way of doing work, a set of priorities, things that are important, then you move on, but the structures are sustained, right? And so you've kind of, I think that, to me, that's an important kind of legacy.
And you touched on the teaching thing. I think when you saw that you taught them how to do it, and then the team went and like completed that task or went out and solved that problem, that made you feel very fulfilled. I think that's also tells you that you're a great teacher or a great role model, a great coach, is like when you want to, and Tyler has always grown up, he wanted to be a coach. But I think that's why we enjoy it, is that we get to teach them something that they may have not previously known, or help them pull out something that they didn't even see in themselves. Like you mentioned, that happened to you. Tyler's done that for me. And it's all about who we surround ourselves with. I think it's finding the right people. Who are some other people that mentor Ann Wilder? Like, who are some other mentors that you have today?
Yeah, I've had some really great, sort of people who I think have mentored me. And, in particular, like through CCSI, I've had a couple of my board chairs, like Sister Barbara Moore was the chair of the CCSI board when I stepped into this position. She was just a wonderful kind of mentor and role model. Cindy Gray, who was on my, a board chair that followed a couple of years later. And it's just such a, just a great mentor, and also just really, sort of in thinking about like, sort of how we connect with the community. And like Heidi Gregory has been a great mentor to me. I know, I know she had some time to spend with both of you, but just, I think, sort of seeing how she approaches really complicated situations. And, I think sometimes you just learn a lot by getting to sit next to people who are doing it really well, and really, sort of learn from them and watch how they're, how they handle it. So I feel like a lot of that, I've, just really had the opportunity to, sort of work with some, really outstanding women.
Wow. And yeah, and I this has just been awesome. I like to goof around and I like to joke and I love to laugh, but from the bottom of my heart, Ann, I'm really glad you're a leader in our community. Like you touched on some things that really hit home to me and to my friends and to my family, what you really care about, and to break down those stigmas of all that stuff we just talked about. I'm just so excited that there's folks like you around here. And
Thanks.
Yeah. And from my back door here, or wherever the heck I'm doing this interview from, this is awesome. I got some chill bumps over here, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Oh boy, gosh, well, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Awesome. Well, we're so happy that you agreed to come on the show, because literally, Tyler, everybody was like, "Oh, who should we have on the show?" Like we're asking, they're like Ann Wilder, and by the fourth time, we were like, "All right, we got to get her on here." So, everybody loves you, Ann, and I can totally see why, because I think when you have that energy and you don't have that ego, people are naturally drawn to those types of people. I think when you're constantly helping others and pulling out the best in themselves, and really not talking about your accolades or, oh, I did this and I did that. I've heard nothing but we and our team and everything else like that from a leader is almost unheard of. So it's just been an honor to have you, and to Tyler's point, to have a leader like you in our community that's making a difference, because we all have to deal with other people in the community. If we have more leaders like you training and developing people to be better in society, it's pretty cool, the community in which we can create around ourselves that we live and work. So this has been phenomenal. I have one last question.
Yeah.
Describe yourself in one word.
Oh, gosh. Optimistic.
Bang! That's why I loved it.
Definitely.
I love that.
It could be the day I win the lottery. I literally think that, I think you got to wake up with a smile on your face and, think about, what could happen.
Well, yeah. Everybody needs to be a little bit more optimistic today. But Ann, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being a guest here on Time Out with Leaders. I cannot wait for the audience to hear this episode, because I think there's you touched on a lot of things that are really important for leaders, but just individuals to hear at this time. We're all kind of questioning what's life and what's life bringing to me next. That it's okay to not know is one of the things that I thought that was most resounding with the episode today, because sometimes you would have no idea what you really want to do.
And sometimes the turn is just the thing, right? Like when I look back, I can see like, oh, and I think everybody's like, of course that was, but I think in the moment, sometimes it doesn't feel that way. So I think if we all just remember to like sit tight and really look for the next little road, I think we usually find it.
Yeah. And breathe and use your car as the opportunity to have that solo karaoke opportunity as well. Yeah. I think might be your secret sauce. Singing September coming in. That's why you're such an optimist, Yeah,
you gotta have that good music to start your day. I agree.
Well, Ann, thank you again so much from Tyler and myself. And it was an awesome interview. I'm gonna hit pause.